The Games Workshop clear flying stand. The worst thing since sliced bread. I'm not a big fan of these things, and I have my own ways to avoid them. The clear, shiny acrylic flying stand is, in theory, an elegant solution to a difficult problem. It is made of clear plastic, and that means that it is invisible, hardly noticeable under your miniature. But in reality, this is a glossy piece of clear plastic that almost always has bubbles trapped inside, and it's super visible. It's basically a Lego lightsaber with the bubble in there just to show you that it's a classic lightsaber. I don't like these, I don't think that they look good, and the worst part about it all is that these break really, really easily. And Games Workshop agrees with me. They hide the fact that these exist as often as they can, and they're very rare to use these in an actual kit. The new Orc Defcoptas don't use them. The last time I believe Games Workshop made a kit that used one of these stands was the Eldar Shining Spears. I recently bought a ton of Tyrannid gargoyles, and each one of these cute little suckers comes on one of Games Workshop's 32mm flying stands. And I didn't even try to put these on. I immediately went to plan B, metal. I actually like the 32mm pitcher's mount that makes up the foot of these bases, but that clear rod has to go. Another flaw you can see is that this is a brand spanking new out of the box base, and already it has some unsightly scratches on the bottom. Unless you're only playing on neoprene mats, these bases scratch up easily. And they always seem to have a sharp mold line running along the edge that has to get smoothed over with sandpaper. Clear bases just don't work. I took my knife and scratched up the surface, making something for my basing material to grip onto. I took a big piece of rough cork and tore it into an appropriate sized piece to sit on the base. And because of the slightly round shape, I took my Dremel tool and carved a dip into the bottom of the cork so it would fit snugly. The ultra thin super glue would probably hold it down without this, but I don't want that cork to be held under any stress. I used extra cork bits to decorate the base and rough up the cork to make it look a little bit more like rock. Now to fill in the base, I like super glue and kitty litter. I have found fresh kitty litter works best, but in a pinch you can raid your cat's box. This builds up material almost instantly and saves me from using too much milliput, which is much more expensive. The milliput is going to be important for the next step, and that is using some scenery bits. These are Alocasia odara plants from Epic Basing, and squishing these down into the putty with a little super glue holds them very securely. The milliput takes a long time to dry, but if you're careful you can keep on working. It's a chemical reaction that hardens it, not drying out like plaster. To cover up this clay, I smeared wood glue over the base, my preferred sander holder downer. I find wood glue to be a little more tenacious than white glue, and I sprinkled some sand over it while it was still wet. I sprinkled more sand over the cork and base and used ultra thin super glue to lock it into position instantly. And I now have a lovely little base. And the interesting thing about these flying stands is no base rim, and I kinda dig it. I mean, I guess there's like a little tiny 1/4 millimeter of base rim, but it's an interesting look, and I kinda wanna use it for my entire Dark Eldar army. Now, I guess the reason the base rim's there is because you're meant to carefully pick your models up from the base rim, but to be honest, I kinda reach for my models like I'm sticking my hand in a big bowl of popcorn. I just grab them, so I don't really mind losing the base rim. But now it is time to get that flying dude on there, and for this, I like brass rod. The little peg that always snaps off on Games Workshop flying stands is 2mm in diameter, and 2mm brass rod is very strong, but can still easily be shaped and cut. Just don't use your good nippers. I gave my rod a rubbing with some fine grit sandpaper to rough it up a little and help the paint attach, and then wiped it clean with some alcohol to remove any dust and grease. For primer, I like self-etching primer. It's really tough, although don't be like me. Give the primer the appropriate time to cure so the surface is nice and strong before moving ahead. I cut the rod the same length as Games Workshop stands and then cut a slit into the cork and shoved it in there. The cork isn't just to look pretty, it gives a really strong and flexible anchor point. If I ever drop this model, which is more than likely, the rod will flex the cork a little bit, but not break off the base. Now I can use the old attachment hole to attach my gargoyle, and because it's the same size, it fits like a glove. It's a real Cinderella slipper situation. Now, a big metal shaft sticking up into my model isn't a perfect solution, but I think it was the best call for these gargoyles. This particular gargoyle has his tail arcing down, and I probably could hide a tiny pin in the tip of his tail attaching it to the base. Then there would be no flying stand at all. I did something similar on this Boba Fett for Star Wars Legion, and Boba Fett gets away with it a little bit because there is a tiny little pin in his foot, and his foot is touching the base. Boba Fett is a pretty small model, and he is made out of tough PVC plastic. This gargoyle is made out of Games Workshop plastic, and if I put a little pin in that tail, It'd be a pretty fragile connection, and he'd probably be fairly bouncy. With that big metal rod in him, he is super, super solid. And I think with a little bit of painting, it'll be even harder to notice. I primed the base black and the gargoyle white, letting the white primer splash onto the tops of the base, hitting those plants. Now for the gargoyle's big ol' wings. I base coated these with the airbrush, giving them a nice pink complexion. Now these wings are big and flat, so to add a little more texture, I carefully painted on some veins. Also, personal pet peeve of mine, when a model overhangs the base by a lot. These gargoyles are probably the worst example of this. They are impossible to move without knocking into one another, and their little wingtip claws grab onto each other, and usually when you pick one up, a few more come with. I wish Games Workshop come up with a way for the wings to be a little more out of the way, but I guess they didn't think this through. But you know what is always thought through? That's right, our Patreon. We have monthly terrain packs. This month is the Plasma Pipes, a totally tubular set of power pipes, plants, generators, and roboskeleton workers. With magnet slots, this energetic set is ready to crisscross a battlefield. And if you always want to be up to date on the goings-on at Eons of Battle and be entered into our monthly giveaways, this month we are picking 3 followers to receive this month's terrain. Follow the link in the description to sign up to our newsletter. Once those veins were in place, I airbrushed red over the bug's skin, being careful but letting the red overspray a little onto the wings. And anything I couldn't reach with the airbrush, I cleaned up with a paintbrush. In between each wing, I sprayed a spot of white to brighten these up and help separate the wing segments, and do some basic highlighting on the skin. Now for washes everywhere. I gave all the skin a red wash, bringing out all the lovely details, and separating their weird knuckly wing hands. And speaking of those wings, I used a combination of beige and blue washes, applying them in random patches to the tan membrane, and then coming in with a clean paintbrush to blend these colors together. Now for the armor. My Tyranids are from High Fleet Behemoth, nemesis of the Ultramarines, and a lovely vibrant retro scheme. Their armor is a blue, which I carefully picked out and then highlighted with a little dry brushing. On his gun hand, I painted this a bone color. I always try and avoid having to base coat with a brush, but here I just couldn't keep his gun clear of red paint. This could have been a good spot for a subassembly, but unfortunately I have already glued all 20 of my gargoyles together. Some thinned down Agrics Earthshade gave me my contrast, and I painted the ammo with a bright green paint. And then it was time for one of my all-time favorite colors. Army Painter Speed Paint Ghillie Dew. It might as well be called Mountain Dew. It is the perfect sci-fi glow color. Just like that, my little Flappy Bird was done. Now for the base. I blasted a dark green paint around the non-existent rim and a bright green ink from above to paint all the plant's leaves. Then I took the same thinned down Agrics Earthshade I used on the gun and threw it over the base to tint it. He's all done, and the flying stand sticking into the base where it got hit with the green overspray actually looks pretty good. The red overspray from his body, though, does not. I've got kind of an Italian flag situation going on, so I think if I just clean that up, it'll look pretty darn good. I took a white paint and covered up the overspray. White paint is pretty striking, but it'll actually always be in shadow from his humongous wings. I was debating going with a black or gray for his big strong rod, but in the end, when it's a proper forest of flight stands, I think white and green mimicking the base will actually hide it the best. I now have one gargoyle finish that I am absolutely sure that flight stand is never breaking. His wings are snapping off before that flight stand breaks. But this isn't the only way I have done flight stands. There's actually one type of Games Workshop flying stand that I actually like, and it's the ball joint flying stand. These don't break because they actually get fatter on the end, not skinnier, and it gives for some fun posability. I kept these on my Drukhari Hellions, and for the Ghost Arc, I made big custom bases and used 2 big ol' rods to hold them very securely. Brass rod will hold up my gargoyles securely, and I won't have to worry about bringing super glue with me when I travel with my Tyranids. They aren't breaking anytime soon. Also, a quick dishonorable mention, Games Workshop's new infantry swoop stands, like you see on the Inceptors, it's the worst thing Games Workshop has ever made.